I don't even know how to properly start this anymore, because even now, months after it all happened, just recalling the memory sends this dull ache through my chest, like something heavy pressing down on me. And it's not even fear at this point. It's something colder, something more permanent, like a shadow that never really leaves, no matter how far I move or how many times I try to tell myself I'm safe. I had been living alone for a little over 2 years in this 3-bedroom apartment that I originally shared with 2 of my college friends. But after they graduated and moved out, I decided to stay back because the rent was surprisingly affordable. And since I work from home, it just made more sense to hold on to a place I was already comfortable in, even if it started to feel a bit too quiet once I was the only one left. So, I turned one room into my bedroom, another one into a makeshift home office, nothing fancy, just a desk, a good chair, my editing setup, and the third room sort of just turned into what I called my storage dump. The kind of room that starts collecting things you don't need, but can't throw away. Like boxes you never unpacked, an old mattress from a guest who never came back, a broken lamp you keep meaning to fix, but never do. And honestly, I barely ever opened that door unless I needed to shove something in there quickly to make the living room look clean. Anyway, this one night, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, I remember it clearly because it was a Thursday, and I had just wrapped up one of those long, draining work days where your back hurts, your eyes sting, and you hate everything on your screen. So I ordered some KFC, sank into my chair in the office, threw on my headphones, and got lost in editing just to distract myself, hoping I could finish at least part of the project before I passed out from mental exhaustion. That's when I heard it for the first time. A soft sound, barely there, like a knock or a tap. And it wasn't coming from the office door or the hallway, but more like from the front door or maybe the wall behind the bookshelf. I couldn't place it exactly, but I paused what I was doing and just sat still, listening, holding my breath a little, waiting to hear it again so I could figure out if it was something real or just my tired brain playing tricks on me. But there was nothing after that. No follow-up sound, no movement, just that single, quiet noise. So I told myself it was probably from outside the building, or maybe the plumbing acting up again, the kind of sound you ignore when you live alone, because acknowledging it means inviting paranoia. And I shrugged it off and got back to editing, trying to force myself into a rhythm again. But about an hour later, closer to 2 a.m., I heard something again, and this time, it wasn't subtle. It was a low, heavy thud, like something falling or someone shifting weight on the other side of a door. And the sound came from the direction of that storage room, the one I hadn't opened in weeks. And immediately, my skin went cold, not because I believed someone was in there yet, but because I knew there was nothing in that room that should have made noise on its own. I stood up slowly, still holding on to that flimsy idea that maybe a box just collapsed or something tipped over on its own. And I walked across the apartment with this sinking feeling in my gut, opened the storage room door, flipped on the light, and just stood there in the doorway, scanning everything, waiting for something to look out of place. But nothing did. The boxes were still piled the way I left them. The mattress was still leaning against the wall at that awkward angle, and the closet doors were shut, just as I remembered. But even though the room looked exactly the same, it didn't feel the same. There was this stillness, like the air had weight, like the room had been disturbed, in some way I couldn't prove, but could feel deep in my chest. So, I did something I'd never done before. I locked the room from the outside. Not because I believed it would stop anything, but because I just needed to feel like I was doing something, anything, to take back control from this strange, creeping feeling that had started to burrow into me. And just when I thought the night was finally over and I could convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, just as I was about to shut everything down and crawl into bed around 3 a.m., I heard something that still makes me feel sick to remember. Someone coughing. Not outside the window, not in the hallway, but inside the apartment. It was faint, like someone trying not to be heard, like the end of a throat clearing that never quite made it out fully. But it was there, real, undeniably human, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe, couldn't move. Just sat there in my chair, frozen, with this curtain rod in my hand that I'd grabbed without thinking, like it would actually do something if someone stepped out from behind a door. I checked the entire apartment, every room, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Everything looked untouched, just like before. And then I stood in front of the storage room again, staring at the locked doorknob, trying to decide whether I had the guts to open it or if I should just wait until morning. Call someone, maybe even leave the apartment altogether. But some part of me, some reckless, tired, angry part, decided I had to open it, even if just to prove to myself that there was nothing there. So I unlocked the door, stepped in, turned on the light. And at first glance, it looked just as unchanged as before. Boxes, mattress, old shelf. And then I noticed the closet door, the sliding one. It was open, just a crack, just enough to see blackness inside. My mouth went dry. I walked over, every step heavier than the last, raised the curtain rod like it was a sword, and yanked the door open in one fast, desperate motion. It was empty. Just darkness and dust and the echo of my own breathing. I stood there for so long that my knees started to ache from locking up. And finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I walked out, locked the door again, turned off the light, and collapsed into bed, telling myself I'd had too much caffeine, too much stress, too much alone time in a big apartment with too many shadows, and not enough explanations. But then the next day, something happened that cracked whatever illusion of normalcy I had left. I ran into my neighbor downstairs, an older woman who lives across the hall and barely talks. But she stopped me by the stairs and said something that chilled me to the bone. She asked if someone had been visiting me the night before. I said no. Why? And she told me that around 2 a.m. she had woken up to use the bathroom and happened to glance out her window. And that's when she saw someone standing outside mine, the one near the bushes, my office window. She said the person wasn't moving, wasn't pacing or walking or doing anything, just standing, perfectly still, facing the glass, like they were watching. I laughed it off in the moment, because what else was I supposed to do? Tell her I thought someone was inside my storage room too? But inside, something in me snapped. And from that point on, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that it hadn't even started yet. And I was right. Because the next night, after trying to distract myself at a friend's place, after convincing myself I'd imagined everything, I came home, a little before midnight, turned onto my street like I always do, and saw them. 3 people standing near my building, not together, spaced out, like they were watching from different angles, like they had positions, like this was something they had done before. They weren't on their phones. They weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were waiting. I ducked behind a parked car, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. And I called the police, whispering everything, my location, the figures, what had been happening. And just as I was giving them my exact address, one of the 3 started walking. Not fast, not slow, just this calm, deliberate pace, straight toward the car I was hiding behind. I panicked, ended the call, walked toward the side alley, slipped behind the garbage shed, and crouched there, trying to make myself invisible, praying I hadn't made a sound, holding my breath for what felt like forever. Eventually, I didn't hear footsteps anymore. Eventually, the cops showed up, and of course, by the time they did, the figures were gone. No trace left behind, no footprints, no explanation, nothing to prove they were ever really there, except the fear still stuck in my throat, like a stone I couldn't swallow. They told me maybe it was kids, or maybe some drunk people cutting through the neighborhood. But I knew that whoever they weren't just passing by. They weren't out for a walk. They were there for me. And if I had come home, even 5 minutes later that night, they would have already been inside. I don't really talk about this night much. Not because I'm scared, not anymore at least, but because whenever I try to explain it, it sounds kind of unreal, like something from a Reddit story or one of those YouTube narrations. But it wasn't like that. It was slower, duller, scarier, in the quietest way possible. Anyway, I was working the closing shift at that tiny walk-in clinic on Route 7, not the big hospital, the side building that's open till 2 a.m. for minor stuff, sore throats, split knuckles, people needing anxiety refills at midnight, that kind of place. I wasn't even supposed to be there that night. Lisa had called in sick and I owed her one from last month. It was quiet for most of the evening, like depressingly quiet. I remember heating up leftover curry around 10:30 and cursing myself for forgetting a spoon. That's the kind of night it was. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the door chime. I didn't even hear footsteps right away. Just the ding, then nothing. That weird pause where the air shifts a little and your gut tightens up, but you don't know why. He walked in maybe 10 seconds later, mid-40s, I think. White guy, wearing jeans and a faded black hoodie that looked wet around the sleeves. He wasn't limping, but his walk was strange, like his legs were heavy or dragging something invisible. "Hi there," I said, before even seeing his face properly. Habit. Then I looked up. He was pale, the sweaty kind of pale. His lips looked dry, cracked, and he was holding something in his right hand. At first I thought it was a flashlight. Nope, not a flashlight. It was a knife, a regular kitchen knife, not bloody, not pointed at me, just in his hand, like it belonged there. I froze. I didn't even think about pressing the alert button. I just stared. He looked at me, kind of through me, really. Then he said, "Do you stitch?" His voice wasn't slurred, but it wasn't clean either. There was a tremble in it, not fear, more like pressure, like something building up. I looked at his other hand. There was a deep cut between the thumb and index finger. Blood was already drying around the edges, not gushing, but not fresh either. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I can get the nurse for you." "Don't want the nurse." That was all he said. Then he walked over to the plastic chairs in the waiting area and sat down, still holding the knife, resting it on his knee, like it was a remote control. I swear to God, I didn't move for a full minute, just stood behind the desk and watched him. I texted Maddie, the nurse on call. She was in the back. I said something like, "Guy here with knife, not threatening, maybe hurt, just stay there." My hands were shaking so bad. The typos were awful. Then I called the police. Not from the work phone. Didn't want him to hear. Used my cell. Talked low. Told them he was armed but calm. They said they'd send someone from Milton, which meant at least 15 minutes. I hung up and tried not to stare at him. He wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there. But his knee kept bouncing. The kind of bounce that says someone's about to snap. Or maybe trying not to. Hard to tell. Then he started talking to himself. "Should have left sooner. Should have known," muttering, barely above a whisper. I wanted to run, but I couldn't leave the desk. There's no back door from there unless you cut through the hallway, and that meant passing right in front of him. Maddie peeked out once. I shook my head. She disappeared again. And then he stood up. I almost puked. Legitimately thought, this is it. He's going to walk over and stab me, and no one's going to get here in time. But he didn't. He walked over to the water cooler, poured himself a tiny paper cup, drank it, stared at the cup, crushed it, and sat back down. He did that 3 times, each time more quietly than the last. Then he dropped the knife. It hit the floor like it didn't matter anymore. I didn't move. He put his head in his hands and started crying. Not loud, not sobbing, just this soft, pathetic sound that honestly made it worse. I didn't know what to do. Maddie finally came out and whispered to me, "Should we help him?" I didn't answer. Then, the front doors opened again. Thank God, 2 officers came in. The man didn't even resist, just stood up, hands raised, and kept saying, "I wasn't going to do anything. I swear, I just needed someone." They cuffed him gently, walked him out. One of the cops asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no. I don't know why. Maybe because maybe he really wasn't going to do anything. Maybe he was just broken in some way I'll never understand. But I never worked the night shift again after that. And I still check people's hands when they come through that door. I moved into that house during a weird, in-between phase of my life. College was behind me, but I didn't feel like an adult yet. I had just gotten a job, low pay, but stable, and I needed somewhere cheap and temporary. That's how I ended up living with this guy named Travis, someone I met through a mutual friend who vouched for him. Said he was a little strange, but harmless. I wish I'd asked more questions. The first time I saw the house, it looked fine. A little rundown, old paint, creaky porch, but nothing out of the ordinary. Travis was already living there when I moved in. He didn't say much. Honestly, it felt like he didn't blink enough. He had this quiet voice, like every word was being filtered through 2 or 3 layers of hesitation, and his smile always came half a second too late. Still, I didn't want to judge a book by its cover. I needed a place, and this one was dirt cheap. It was within the first week that I noticed the basement had no doorknob, just a hole where the knob used to be. I asked him about it one evening, casually, while we were eating leftover pizza on the couch. He looked at me, paused, then said, "Oh, yeah, I keep tools down there, sharp stuff. I'd rather no one trips and gets hurt." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way he smiled after, like he was waiting for me to believe it. I didn't say anything else. He had these little quirks that didn't mean much on their own, but added up to something wrong. Like how he always played white noise at night. Sometimes it was rain, sometimes static. Loud enough that I could hear it through the walls. He said it helped him sleep, but it felt more like he didn't want to hear something. Or didn't want me to. One night, I stayed home sick from work. I didn't tell him, just texted my manager and stayed in bed. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard something. Not just the usual thumps and creaks an old house makes. It was this steady, dragging sound from downstairs. Something heavy scraping against the basement floor, then a loud metallic bang. I froze. Didn't move. I just lay there, barely breathing, waiting for it to stop. The next morning, I asked him if he'd dropped anything downstairs, just to test the waters. He didn't answer right away, just sipped his coffee and said, "Must have been the dryer. It shakes when it's off balance." But the washer and dryer were both in the upstairs bathroom. Another time, I opened a kitchen drawer looking for foil and found a Ziploc bag full of what looked like teeth. Human, maybe. Maybe not. I only glanced at them before I shut the drawer. I didn't ask about it. I think I was afraid of the answer. The worst moment was probably when I mentioned the smell. It started in the garage, faint, sickly sweet, like meat left out too long. I figured it was maybe a dead rat or something. When I brought it up, kind of jokingly, like, "Dude, I think something died in the garage," his face changed. Not shocked, not grossed out, just calculated. He looked at me for way too long, then said, "You sure it's not you? Might be your shoes." And then he laughed. I didn't. Things escalated after that, not loudly, not obviously, but in these quiet, suffocating ways. I started catching him watching me, not directly, but reflections. I'd see him in the mirror behind me, just standing in the hallway, silent, still. One time I came home early from a weekend trip because the bus schedule changed. He He wasn't expecting me. I found him in the kitchen with gloves on and a giant trash bag. He froze when I walked in. We just stood there. I asked if he was cleaning. He said, just clearing space, some junk in the freezer I've been meaning to toss. There was nothing in the freezer the next day, not even ice cubes, just bleach. I wanted to leave, obviously, but rent was cheap and moving takes time and money. I didn't have right then, so I stayed. But I started documenting things. Text to myself, pictures, little audio recordings. In case. I didn't know what I was building a case for, but something inside me was whispering, "You'll need this later." Eventually I went to the police, not with accusations, just concerns. I showed them a couple of the recordings, told them about the smell, the bag of teeth, the no-knob basement. They didn't laugh. That actually made it worse, in a way, because I could tell they took it seriously. 2 officers showed up 2 days later while I was at work. I came home to find Travis gone. The front door was unlocked. His room was empty, just a mattress on the floor and some crumpled receipts. The basement door had a new knob on it, but it was locked. They didn't tell me much, just said he wasn't under arrest, just being questioned. I never saw him again. I moved out a few weeks later. Every little sound in that house kept me on edge. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering if I had imagined it all, if maybe I was paranoid, jumping to conclusions, looking for horror in the cracks of ordinary life. But then I remember the smell, the quiet dragging noises, the look in his eyes when I caught him off guard, and I know I wasn't wrong.